Hi everyone, my name's Katie Cullen. I am a Running Start student at EW. I'm pursuing a musical theater degree, an economics degree, and a minor in poli-sci and a queer and sexualities minor. And today I'm going to be talking about discrimination in sports, gender, politics, sexuality, and expression. I should mention that there will be a quiz about this that you'll need to complete, so you might want to take notes so that you can remember everything. And hopefully you have some learning that you do. Yeah. So first, we're going to define discrimination, which is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things. You can discriminate someone based on their gender or their sex, their sexuality, whether that's their orientation or their sexuality in terms of how they express that, their race, their age, their ability or disability, their political beliefs, and someone's religion. Next topic we're going to talk about is, do sports have sexuality, or a race or a gender, or are there any stereotypes that we assign to a certain sport? Personally, I can think of a couple that have been assigned to people. You may usually see that people will assign boys who do figure skating a feminine personality or something along those lines. They may assume that people who do football are very macho and masculine, or sometimes, or there's the idea that all Black people are good at basketball or running or those kinds of things. So some sports do have those things. If you can think of another one, that's really great. Well, it's not great that we have that stereotype, but those are those things that we have to be aware of in breaking down those stereotypes. Okay, next we're going to talk about the WNBA representation. Now you may be thinking, well, why does representation matter and why is it important? And why are we looking at it specifically in the women's National Basketball Association? Well, first of all, representation is very important because it is important to people, especially younger people, to see themselves out there on the court or the field or whatever they're doing, so that they know that they're welcome in that area, especially with sports where something is so vast and so many people can do it. It's really important that representation be showed, and it's important for the equality of our culture. And so for why we're looking at the WNBA, I chose the WNBA because I was thinking that if there was women basketball is usually pretty open and equal, so I wanted to see how equal it was. And now if we look at the representations, we can kind of see that they're really interesting to look at, actually. If you look specifically at the head coaches, you'll see that 75% of them are white, while 25% of them are African American. But when we look at players, only 17% of the players are white, while 67.4% are African American. And that's really interesting. And you'll actually see the same kind of separation in the coaches, the head coaches, and the assistant coaches as well. And another thing you'll look at is that you can look at the women percentage as well and see that that they're not all women in either of the cases of the coaches. Of course, they are for the players, but and if we look at the history as well, we can see that the head coaches has actually been pretty similar throughout. The only time there was a higher amount of African American was in 2017, where there was 5 and 7, and but otherwise it's been pretty much the same, almost exactly the same throughout the years historically. And if we look at the assistant coaches, they also are in the same range, not really changing too much on anything. And similar with the players, and you'll see that actually the white amount of players has been decreasing relatively, going up in the years, while more African Americans and other races are in there as well. And so that's really something important to look at when we look at representation. Now, this is looking at college head coaches, Division One. On the left side, you'll see that we have men's sport and then subdivided by men and women, meaning coaches on either one. And on the right, you'll see women's sports subdivided by men and women coaches. Now, if we look at men's sports, we can see that there's a majority more of men coaches, probably because it's a men's sport and they feel more comfortable having a male coach. And there's only 5% of women coaches. Now, when we go to the opposite side, we see that there is also a higher amount of male coaches, very slimly, but still there, about 400 or so if we look at the numbers in depth. And that's kind of important because why would we want more men coaching male sports, but not more women coaching women's sports? It's kind of this odd scenario where the men actually are being the leaders in both. And it's just kind of interesting to look at and understanding that that situation. And you can also see the race breakdown of all of those too. And you can see that the majority is going to be looking more African American actually, which is really interesting in almost all of the categories, which is really interesting to look at those numbers. And you can see historically that the same is true, which is really fun to look at. You can look at the history. I implore you to look in more detail if that's something that interests you, because I think that's fun to look at. But yeah, that's what we're going to talk about on that slide. Now we're going to look at gender and race and D1 student athletes. On the left side, you have your male athletes, and on the right side, you have your female athletes. They are subdivided into sports, and now I do have one question personally about how this data, why this certain sports were chosen. Of course, we see basketball and softball and baseball, which are the equivalents of each other because basketball is, you don't have a female version of basketball, but softball is the female version of baseball, although it could be argued that women could play baseball as well, or men could play softball, or that there is no gender required for either of them. But I find it odd that they chose to do outdoor track for female in opposed to perhaps volleyball, which is what would be a Division I female sport. You can't see, but I'm doing quotation marks around the word female. And then football would be the, again, quotation marks around male sport and for the Division I. So that's my only question about that. Or why was it outdoor track and not outdoor track? That's my only issue with this. I wish I had another sport had been presented. Nonetheless, I think that this information on these graphs are very important as well. And we're going to break down each of them. When we go to basketball, we see that African American male athletes are the leading people in basketball, followed by white male athletes, and then Latino male athletes, non-resident athletes, male athletes. No, I was right. That for basketball, and then Latino. And then for football, it's almost even, but not quite. African Americans lead by 4% in football, and then white male athletes. And then people who are mixed race of 2 or more. And then it looks like other or not specified. And then for baseball, you have the leaders being white at almost 80%, followed by Latino, and then African American, and then other. 2 or more, and then other. And then if we go over to the female side and we look, we can see that the same is true, not to the same degree exactly, because you can see that there's some slight differences. There's more white basketball players than there are African American than in the other table, in the male table, when for female, but it is the same order. And then if we go to outdoor track, you can see that there is a significant higher in white outdoor track athletes for females. This is where I think that this could be interesting because I had hoped that volleyball would have been in here because I think it would be interesting to look at outdoor track for males. So perhaps instead of football, they should do outdoor track for both, and then it would be the equivalent for both. But again, I didn't make the data, so I can't really be mad at it. But anyways, continuing, it looks like it's white female athletes for outdoor track. And then we go to African American outdoor track athletes. And then there's a tie for 2 or more in non-resident races. And then you can go to other, which is the next one. For softball, white female athletes have the highest amount in softball, very significantly. And then Latino, and then followed by 2 or more races, and then African American, and then other, which is and Asian Pacific Islander is on there as well, which is very interesting to look at. You can look historically too. If we look farther back, you can see that they mainly pertain the same amount for each time, following the categories. Okay, next. Now we're going to be talking about LGBTQAI plus people in sports. There are 2 lists here. I've categorized the 2 lists into 2 separate categories because the list of names have been determined by when they came out. Was it during or after their career? And you'll probably recognize a lot of these names. Either from history or just because you like sports, and hopefully you can do that. This representation is really important, and in fact, many of them celebrate Pride and go to Pride events or have Pride specialties. As you can see in the top right corner, we have Megan's jersey with the Pride flag on her number, and we have Adam Rippon on a magazine talking about sports and LGBT and his identity. This representation is really important for those people who identify within these and can see themselves. And the talking points and point of views of these have been have been a current current topic of how to, especially with the terms of gender and that construct, and how to deal with transgender athlete, or not to deal with, but how to validate them and still allow them to play in today's sports world where we still have very gendered and sexed sports. Now we're going to look at sports earnings separated by female and male. At the top, I have a note. I'll read it. The gap between men and women in income has women earning on average 77% of what males make for their respective sports. As we can see, the only sport that has women earning more is tennis. But unfortunately, the women do not play as long as the men or for the duration, so they earn less overall at the end of the day. There are several reasons for why someone of a different gender or sex may earn different pay than someone else. If we look specifically at in terms of viewership, there is a bias that sometimes that men play better and therefore it's more worthwhile to watch them. Or some people just prefer men's sports over women, and that's a taste and preference, of course, which could equate to why females earn less overall. And some of it is just bias in general, but there's lots of things, and that could be one of them. If you have other ones, you may want to write them down as to why you think that men and women earn different amounts of earnings. Now we're going to talk about briefly some political history and actions that have taken place in sports. Recently, there has been the protest that Colin Kaepernick started by originally sitting to protest police brutality. among Black people, which is the Black Lives Matter movement. And after discussing with a former vet and current NFL player, um, Kaepernick decided to kneel instead of sit, to be more respectful, which was his goal. He didn't want to offend anyone. He just wanted to show that he was advocating for his point of view. So that has drawn up some controversy, and he actually now has a Nike ad, which has gained a lot of controversy towards not only Kaepernick, but also Nike itself. And this is not the first Black Lives Matter protest that we have seen in sports, as African Americans are very intertwined in sports. They're going to be protesting things that they have, just like white people and other races have protested as well. If you know, you may know that in the Olympics, the Black Panthers had a protest during the national anthem when they raised their fists in the air. And many NFL players, if they could not kneel without repercussions, they chose to stay in the locker room during the anthem, or they knelt like Kaepernick did. On the other side, many NFL teams, staff members, and even players have come out against this protest. And that has kind of shown, and there have been stances where they have banded together to talk about this. And the whole point I think that Colin Kaepernick wanted is so that we were having this conversation, that he wanted us to start talking about these things, which in the end we did end up doing and there was controversy, of course, which you're going to have with every protest. And not only did football or NFL players do this, but it's also known in the NBA too. They haven't been known, NBA teams have had been known to have their own protests for Black Lives Matter, whether they wore t-shirts that had sayings on them that were for the Black Lives Matter movement, or other ways that they protested. Another political action, not necessarily a protest exactly, but more of a statement. Muhammad, who was a fencer and won at the Olympics, has slammed President Trump for his travel ban on Muslims, because she is a Muslim woman who wears a hijab while she fences. She has very much been open about her discrimination because of her Islamic religion, and she's not the only one who has talked about this. LeBron James have, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has, and there's many people who have come out against the travel ban. And I should mention that the NBA and the WNBA have worked very passionately to better understand discrimination in general. And I think that they have a really interesting situation, because the WNBA likes to help young women. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but the WNBA has this thing where if you buy a ticket, you can donate parts of your ticket to a group of your choice. Some of the group suggestions were, I believe, the Planned Parenthood, Trevor Project, or several other local groups, depending on where you are, to help women and to help the LGBTQ community. Both the WNBA and the NBA have marched in their Pride events, I think especially in the New York Pride event. Now, on the other side of those things, there's also those who feel blacklisted because of their political beliefs pertaining to the current administration and President Trump. They feel that they cannot openly support the current administration because they might face some repercussions, whether that's stigma from their players or just outright discrimination. And that's something that has recently been talked about, especially regarding Tom Brady, who President Trump has said that he is very close with, but Tom Brady himself has not wanted to say whether he supports him or not. Okay, and so we're going to stop there because that's the end of the PowerPoint. There will be a quiz, of course, and potentially a discussion in which you talk about discrimination. All of my data was from the TIDES website, and I will attach that link as well, so that if you are more interested in those data and their reports that they put out, you can look at those. And overall, this is mostly just to open the eyes to the discrimination and talk about it and get the message out, because sports is something that should be enjoyed by everyone, and it's really sad when there's discrimination. That's all.
Go to record and it'll stop recording.